Hello, I'm Susan Scheewe, and I'm going to be showing you how to do this beautiful landscape and show you the water reflections. I'll be right back. Hi, welcome to my workshop. I'm going to be showing you something really special and fun using watercolors. I'm going to show you how to do those beautiful reflections. As I'm working, I've done a scene, and my favorite time of day is morning or in the evening when the colors are so rich and bright. And as I've worked here, I've taken a sheet of paper, 140-pound cold press, and I've put on a sketch. And the first thing I want to do is wet the sky area. As I'm wetting the sky area, I'm going to pull the water container because I would like it to be really nice and wet up there. And I've got an angular, large background brush. I'm going to take and pull this across, nice long strokes, and I want to get it good and wet. That's really important. This is one of the reasons why you want to use a heavier weight paper when you're working. And as you work, paper is going to be really important. It's going to make your painting fun, or it can make it absolutely miserable. And the problem is, many times when you're working, you don't realize that the paper's causing you as much problem as it can. Sometimes it can really, as many years as I painted, it can throw you such a problem, you feel so frustrated. And if you get good paper, it makes the painting fun. Now, as I've worked this, it's important that it gets a shine. And as you can see in here, as that shine goes on, I can see if in a little area I didn't catch, I want to get a little bit more water in there. The reason for wetting this when you're doing skies is so that the pigment will diffuse back. Maybe you're going to do another painting with an even larger sheet of paper. And sometimes when I do those, I'll soak the entire paper in water and put it in a tray, getting it good and wet, because on those really large surfaces, it's sometimes wise to just get them so soaked in so that blending will become easy for you. And that's just so it'll work well in the sky area. Now you can see I go back and forth getting it nice and wet. Now, let's look at my palette, and I'm going to start with some of my yellow. And I'm going to get yellow pale and a little bit of cad yellow medium. As I'm working, just so you understand, that's cad yellow medium and this is cad yellow medium. I've got a little bit of them both, but I'm picking up also towards the orange. Come down towards my horizon, taking nice, long, sweeping strokes. Now, paper can be tilted, and if I tilt it upwards as I'm working, and so that it'll kind of blur down, sometimes that'll help give me, as I'm working, the gradation with it flowing down. So if you're using your paper on a surface that's angled where it's flowing downwards now, then you might want to pick it up and pull it so that it's going a little bit in the next direction. Next, I'm going to come in on my palette, and let's look, and I'm going to reach way up here and get that orange. And the orange, again, I'm putting on with my background brush. The background brushes are, I had them cut for longer angles, and they've designed them that way so that now all I have to do is decide what size I want. They've got some larger sizes, and they're developed so they got a nice sharp edge. That's going to make it easier for me to work with. Now, let's look up on my surface here on my palette, and I'm going to get just some of this beautiful color. It's called Bright Cranberry, and I want to come across, nice long strokes again. If this were not wet, I couldn't get this gorgeous diffusing color. Now, see how I'm streaking this back as I come back into it. It gives a very cloud-like look. I've got a very dear friend, Betty Denton, who does gorgeous watercolors as well, and she does really nice, gorgeous soft pastel flowers and keeps things in a more pastel range very often. And sometimes I keep mine pastel, but many times I come back in and I make mine bright. It's fun to take from a lot of different people, have that opportunity of seeing how things can vary. Now, I'm going to come back down and I'm going to get in my water and come back up to my palette in just 1 second. And as I'm doing that, rinse your brush fairly often. As you rinse it and you're moving back and forth the colors, you're also putting a little bit of water on that brush or on the surface. I've also got some bottles that I can spray on here as I'm working, as I start to use up color. And as you can see, the wells here are designed, the water or and pigment are kind of going down into this so that I can pick it up when I want to use more of the color. See how that just pulls right on there and how fluid that is? So it depends on how much pigment I'm wanting to pick up. This here is magenta deep and a little bit of violet. I'm going to pull this across. Depends on how much lavender you want. You could practice on little cards. Now, if I do this, the one thing I want to be careful of that I don't end up with just stripes. So I'm going to come on this surface and look, I'm tapping right across this. And as I tap across, it gets kind of a cloud look. Makes it really pretty. Every time they're going to diffuse out just a little bit different. Ooh, look at that, how pretty they are. Love color. Fun to paint. It's fun to get into the colors. As many years as I've painted, always fun to get those beautiful colors out and work with them. And you can see how easy that was to get a cloud look. Another thing that the more you paint, the experience has taught me that near your horizon, if I keep these clouds really very kind of stretched out and low, they'll look more realistic. If they get higher in the sky, that's when I build the larger, more rolling type of clouds. Now, I want to come back in and re-wet. I'm going to pick this up just one more time, get a little bit closer while I'm getting this area so wet, and pull this through. The reason that I'm holding it here is because, of course, my painting area is at an angle, so it would roll back. So I can just hang on to it for a second. And the reason I want to re-wet that, I'm going to put in the trees. And as I put on the trees, I want them to diffuse out because that's going to give that elegant look of distance. As I'm coming in here, again, I'm coming right towards the edge. Now watch. And I say watch because I know sometimes I listen when I'm watching TV. And then I kind of drift back and forth. So this is really important step that you can see how I'm handling that brush, pulling it up uneven. And I'm going to pull this across, get those just started in there. And because it's wet, get that nice distance appearance. You know, there's a tendency to overpaint something because you know in the distance there's these fir trees, and instead, so you put every needle on them. And even when you're standing there, you can see very often from photographs. Now, I'm going to change brushes, and the reason I'm changing brushes is I want a smaller one for a little bit more control. It's not a real small brush, picking up a little bit of color as well. And I'm going to put these in, and now I can just dab in just a little bit more height. And as I'm pulling these around, get this so that as I'm working it, you can see how I start to get a tree shape going in there. It's wet, so as I'm putting on those tree shapes, you'll see that I'm not getting them real defined. It's so easy to get that crazy spacing uniform. And what I mean by that, doing it 1, 2, 3 inches apart. So think about varying the height, think about varying the spacing, and even on this horizon as I made it, I think about not making it too straight. It's real easy to make it so it's straight across. Even if you're out in a landscape area and you're seeing it, it can be too straight. Now, let's look up on my palette for 1 second so you can see how I'm loading again, and I'll hold that brush up there so you can see where I'm getting it really kind of wet again. And as I'm getting it real wet, it's running down. It's making it easier so I could pick up some color. I'm going to reach in here, and the color is Hunter's Green, and the color right beside it is my Hooker's Green. So as I'm reaching in, I can get those colors, and I can always check those on a scrap of paper. I'm going to do it on this. I've got that for a card. Get this right over here. See how dark they are. So sometimes it's handy to have those scraps of paper handy. Now this is still wet enough that it's diffusing out. Sometimes it'll dry more quickly. See how it just kind of pops when I touch down. It's going to pop right on out. It doesn't hold a sharp edge. Now eventually I want that sharp edge to be in there. So it's going to be important to know how I get it so it looks like I've got a sharper edge and one that's not as defined. And coming back in here with these softened colors gives it depth. Look how nice that looks. It looks already like you're looking way into the distance. Easy to accomplish. And sometimes when you're doing a painting, maybe you can do just like a small card, only using a section of it. Now to show you some of the water reflection. As I come down into my water areas, and as we're working here, I want to make sure that my water area doesn't look like just one little circle or pond. I've done a sketch, so I want it to lay in there vertically. And for it to look well, and to do much the same thing as what's happened up in the sky, I want to pre-wet an area. So I'm going to come down, pick up that water again, hang on to it for just a second. I'm going to pull this through so that it gets good and wet. Sometimes I could use one of my spritzers to wet an area, but as you can see, as I'm coming around here, I'm forming actually the shape of my lake. So as I'm doing that, I want to think about not just getting the lower section of my paper wet, but I want to think about what is going to be my water line, because wherever I put pigment, it's going to diffuse back in there. So I'll put that down, and we're going to go up to my palette, and I'm going to start out with yellow again. So as I go up to my palette here, and I pick up my yellow, I'm going to think about where do I want to put it. Yellow, a little bit of that yellow medium, yellow pale, put it right kind of next to the bank. It's going to look like you folded the paper in half, so it's going to kind of reverse. So I'm pulling this through, good and wet. Because it's smaller, I don't need to use that background brush, although sometimes I use it. The more you paint, the larger brushes work more easily for you. Okay, now I've got the yellow, which is coming down really nicely. I want to pick up a little tiny bit more orange, so let's look up here, and I'm going to get orange and put it down into my water. So I'm going to come back, and in just one second I'm going to go up and I'm going to pick that cranberry color up, just like we did up above. So I'm going to go up to my palette and get the cranberry color, pulling it so that it's nice and wet, getting color on the edge of the brush, and pulling it down. Now, as I'm working, sometimes I'll just pick the paper and turn it around. This time it's working fine, but if you're ending up with a layer of color, always think about maneuvering your surface, because that's an easy thing to do. Now, I could either leave that a really nice soft pink, or I can come back in, and I like to get some of those brighter colors and get a little bit of my deep magenta and violet. If I leave it, you want to make sure, check that you don't look too striped, and we've got some clouds up there. Well, I don't need to match them. I'm going to come back in and pull some of that color through so it'll give the appearance of sort of like there's clouds reflecting in there. And always go back in if you're not sure and you have more color. Water can make it so much easier to do in watercolors than it is with oil and acrylic. And I love oil and acrylic, but this is the easiest of all to paint when you're working with, because it moves for you and it makes beautiful water reflections. Now, I've got kind of a little bit of planning ahead. I'm going to put a, let's look here. Let's go up to the green for a second. And as I pick up a little bit of green on that brush, I'm not going to pick up too much. I'm going to go back down to my surface, and I'm going to put in just a little bit of line here of where I'm going to put a big fir tree. I'm going to put a fir tree here, and I want to put one here, which means it's easier, as this is wet, to get some of the reflection starting into the water. So I'm going to come right in here with some green and some indigo, and I start to put some water reflection in. And the reason it's easier is it's wet. It kind of pulls, it flows very easily in there for me. You can see how it works for you. It'll never work that easy when you're doing your acrylic or your oil. And I like using those mediums too, but you know, so many times watercolor gets a bad rap for being so hard. And some of the things really, if you know what to do, are going to be more fun and easier for you than you ever could imagine. And right in here, I've got an area that I dropped some water in it, and it's starting to get like a little bit of a, what's called a little bit of a bloom. So I'm going to lightly come back in and kind of pull that across. And it's important that you can know that you can do that, or you can cut through these, kind of make that water get a little bit of feeling of movement. So as you're working, now at this point, it's easy to overwork something. It's just really, you go back in and play and play and play in it, and you get your water all mucked up. If you decide that you want to do something different, what you can do is let this dry, and then you can come back and rework it. So I'm going to let this dry. It's about the way I want it anyway. Look how hazy and beautiful and how much atmosphere I've created back in here so easily by painting that on that wet surface. Now I'm going to lay this brush down, and we're going to start putting in a little bit of the background. So I want to layer it, so it depends on how much color. I can either make it look like there's snow going in here, or I can put a lot of color into it and make it look like it's just an early spring morning and there's more foliage starting. So it just depends on how much color you add in here, but these two techniques would remain the same whether it was winter or fall. Now coming through, I'm going to pick up just a little bit of these gray blue colors. I'm going to make this look like there's kind of some snow in here, and I'm going to pull these through. Sometimes what I can do is even pull color just right off the bottom edge of the color that I've got on there. I'm going to pull just a little bit of that color through and pull this on down. If I want to put some sunshine up here, I can reach up, get a little bit of yellow, and I can get that yellow and take it back down right in the middle above that tree, or above the water and below the tree line, and I can put a little bit in, and look how it looks like sun's glowing right across the snow. You might want to do something like that. It looks like it's catching right in there. Now we're going to start doing some of the fir trees, and as you do fir trees, you want to think about the shape of them. And I know as we're working, they come in many different varieties. Typically, including myself, I tend to put in the Christmas tree shape, and the Christmas tree shape is more perfect. Now, watch, though, as I'm loading this. See how I'm kind of smashing that brush down? You're going, oh my gosh, she's going to ruin that good brush. It's a synthetic brush, and it will reshape. And as I tap this down, I'm really kind of smashing it so that the end of that brush, when you look at it, is going to be more open. See how it's kind of feathering in there and how it looks like it looks like I've damaged it. Believe me, it'll shape up. That's one of the nice parts about these brushes. Now I'm going to go up, take off a little excess, but I want to start up here very lightly tapping. Tap it up and down. As I'm coming down, I'm going to pick up a little tiny bit more paint. Slowly do these trees. As I'm starting in, just tap it up and down. If I see water standing, which I'm seeing on that, I'm going to take the excess off on my paper towel, and I'm going to come back in, maybe get a little bit less water on my brush, more pigment, tapping it to make the tree shape. Think about the shapes of those trees as you're putting them on and making them come back and forth, letting those branches come out. It's really fun. Get this one so it looks almost silhouette. I've got it nice and dark. If I don't want it that dark, I can blot it, take some of the color out, just blot it with a paper towel. Think, oh, I got it too dark. Or you can come back in and darken it. It's probably easier to come back in and darken them than it is to lift color, but you can lift color out. As I'm doing it, I want to think about changing the angles. And so here we go. You've watched one tree go on. And down at the bottom, I usually make them uneven. And I come in and I make this so that as you're working, you want to think about softening it so that it's got just like a very soft shadow in here. And look how easy that is. I'm just pulling color from underneath. Just that color is pulling from underneath. And I'm going to come back in here and get some more color. And as we're working, I want to do a shorter tree. I want to think about making different size trees. So I'm going to come in and put this in, tapping it back and forth. And as I'm working, I can see that down in my water area, I've got down by my finger, I've got just a wonderful little bloom going. And a bloom or a flower mark, and it's where I've dropped water in it. And I want to rinse that off, my brush that is. And I want to make sure I get a clean paper towel down here. And I'm going to come in and I'm going to soften this so that as I'm working, I want to get that out of there. And I want to put it so that it looks like it's going to be part of my painting that's going in there. So I'm going to do a little bit of repair. It's good to know. Now, somebody said plan some mistakes. I said, I don't have to plan any mistakes. I get a few in there on my own. And that's something to know how to handle And what to do with it, if you start to see an area like that that you don't like in there, you can go back in and you can pull that color through and you can get it out of there, and that's important to know. And every now and then those things happen. It's from dropping water on it. Now I'll go back up to my tree and tap on here. Just pull this on down. And usually, again, what did I do on the other tree? I rinsed my brush, I came back in, and I pulled in some shadow area. So it's important to get those shadow areas in. I tap that in just a little bit darker. Okay, now one more big tree going in here. I'm going to make one more big tree. Remember, these distant trees, as I put them in, the surface, if you happen not to see, was very wet. As I'm putting these on now, I'm tapping through. Smash that brush right down. Don't be afraid of smashing it down when you're getting that on. It's going to open that brush up. You're going, yike. But it'll work, and it'll go back to shape, I promise you. When I went to college and whatnot, I ended up on too big a budget. Not too big a budget, I should say, not a big budget. It was a small one. And so making sure that I use brushes even yet that do a lot of things that work the best for me, and making sure that I don't damage them. I've still held on to those things because it's really important that I know to many of us that we get value for what we've got. Nothing worse than getting something that's not working well. So just keep working. Look how neat these colors are going on here. And as I keep coming back, now look at as I come back, I can get more value. Coming back, I can get more value. Now there's another brush down here. Sometimes I use it, and I'm going to give it a rinse. We'll look up here as I go into my pigment. This is called a fan brush. As you look, it's a fairly new one, so that, well, it's going to have a little bit of color in it, but they start out, it's bristle. And this is another easy brush to get some foliage on with. So if, as you're working, it's a little bristle, it's fan shape, and then at the bottom I can come in, and with that same brush, I can nick up just a little bit of some grass areas that show, a little bit of grass areas. Now rocks can always seem to be a problem, and as you I took a lot of photographs of rocks because I went out just to see what they look like, and there's a tendency to overpaint them. So as you're working, let's look at some burnt sienna and a little bit of indigo, and we're going to come down here and I'm going to show you how easy it is to get these on. If you put these on, just kind of blop them in here, you get that really nice rock shape, and it's fun to put on, and then kind of blop them. Sometimes I'll use a sponge so that they don't end up so uniform in color. There's a tendency to want to make them little round dots like this. You want to make them uneven, coming back in, and come back in and kind of blop over them. It's a special technique. It's called the blopping technique. But what you do is if you just kind of dib and dab over the top of them, they'll look so much better than if you overwork them. And then I kind of throw shadows on back underneath these things, pulling it around. So don't be so neat and tidy with your rocks. In fact, sometimes I'll even use the end of my brush and kind of scratch things through it so that it looks more realistic as it's coming down into those water sections and pulling on through, adding more color as we're doing this. And then if I want to get some reflections of those rocks, you want to wet right underneath, just wet. A little bit of water, see that'll run right on down, works great. So it'll work right on down and then come through. Think about uneven shapes. So when you come through. Now there's a couple deciduous trees. And deciduous trees have lost their leaves because of the time of the year. And as I come up, I want this to be really wet as we're working. And I want it to come in there, roll the brush. I've got a round brush, and as you can see, it's got a nice point on it. That's going to help me as I come down on my paper. So I'm going to come over, and when I put my trees on, which always help these, I balance my little finger on my surface so that as it's working, you can see how my little finger is right here. And that way it works as a brace, pulling up the trees. And when I do my trees, I try not to get them too straight. If I make them too straight, even if Mother Nature does, it makes them look as if they are growing just like a telephone pole out of something. So you want to add lots of little blades of grass, sometimes two little arches, and you've got some birds flying up there. Think about making some greeting cards. If you're frightened to do this and get something that's so big, in fact, I can lean down and I can show you, even on this one, you could take it and use just a small section of it and make a beautiful painting. So think about making that for a greeting card. Thank you so very much for joining us, and I hope that you're going to want to do something very much like this and enjoy those watercolors just as much as I do. It's going to be fun for you to paint.